Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the final episode of X's and O's for the 2018-19 school year. I'm Joe Thompson along with Isaac Dienison. Later on the show, we'll be continuing our coverage of the NHL and NBA playoffs. They've been getting more competitive.
Oh, yeah.
But first, we're going to discuss something that happened earlier this past week. The NFL draft started on Thursday, ended on Saturday. Kyler Murray was taken first overall by the Arizona Cardinals out of Oklahoma. Isaac, take me through that pick and then give me the rest of your thoughts on the first round. Any surprises?
I mean, Kyler Murray, if you were just thinking of this from like a, analytical perspective, Kyler Murray, isn't your typical number one overall type quarterback. Because not only did the Cardinals draft a quarterback last year at 10th overall in the first round, they picked Josh Rosen last year in the first round. They decided to pretty much abandon him entirely by picking Kyler Murray, largely because of the guy they hired. They hired Cliff Kingsbury from Texas Tech after, strangely enough, he got fired. He was going to be the USC offensive coordinator, and then the Cardinals, I think that was where he was going to be, and then the Cardinals lured him to be their next head coach because he coached Patrick Mahomes in college, quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, and he just won the MVP. So he's going to try to bring that style of offense to the NFL, but, probably for what it is, it's probably not an awful pick.
No.
Considering, Kyler Murray, he's won the Heisman Trophy last year. He was the most exciting player in college football last year, and he should ideally be a good fit for the type of offense that Kingsbury is going to try to run. They made other draft picks like Hakeem Butler in the fourth round, one of the best athletic receivers to add to the core that's already led by Larry Fitzgerald. David Johnson still the main running back on that offense. Arizona should be an improved team. It's just I wonder how Kyler Murray is going to adjust to the NFL because there's a lot of criticism for him being too short when he was going through the combine.
That's kind of the thing, though. There's been a lot of undersized quarterbacks that have thrived. You can look at guys like Drew Brees, Russell Wilson.
Probably the best example is Drew Brees. And Russell Wilson's going to get there.
Yeah, and a couple Super Bowls between those two guys. But take me through the rest of the first round. What were some of the biggest takeaways that you saw there, and like some really big surprises that you saw?
I think the actual best player in the draft is probably Nick Bosa, even though he really only had like a 3-game sample size of tape to go off of last year. There's no doubt he has an unbelievable athletic profile. The San Francisco 49ers made the correct decision. I almost thought that maybe, it would have been better for Arizona to get a guy like Nick Bosa, but now San Francisco is going to have a really formidable, I think, defensive line that's going to be led by Bosa. They still have, I believe, DeForest Buckner there and other big guys on that defense. Solomon Thomas, they spent a high pick on. Quinnen Williams was the guy that went third. He's another really good player out of Alabama. A lot of people thought he was the best player in the draft. And it's a lot of difference of opinions here, but and you really can't go wrong, in my opinion, with any of these good pass rushers that went early. Quinnen Williams to the New York Jets, Josh Allen just falling right into the lap. Not the quarterback Josh Allen, but the pass rusher Josh Allen out of Kentucky falling right into the Jacksonville Jaguars' hands. They already have a reputation of being, at least from a couple years ago, being that Saxonville group. They're still a couple years removed from it. They have lost a couple players from that group, but getting a guy like Josh Allen that's still young and is going to be paying dividends later on for the Jaguars. Daniel Jones was the second quarterback taken in this draft. The New York Giants at 6th overall.
Yikes.
I think they're going to rue this day. I think they're going to regret this. He shouldn't have been the second quarterback taken. There were people that are more knowledgeable than I am. I'm not claiming to be an expert at this stuff. I just kind of follow along with what other people that are actually paid to talk about the draft. I'm just following along with what they have to say. But they had, some analysts had Daniel Jones going in the 3rd round.
Yeah.
And
Dwayne Haskins was available.
And I'll touch on this later, but Daniel Jones, he didn't even complete 60% of his passes his senior year in college. And he didn't play all that great against good defenses. And he's from the ACC, one of the best conferences in college football. Big head scratcher there for the New York Giants. You have to hope that he develops like Mitch Trubisky did in Chicago, because right now I don't think the Giants, other than Saquon Barkley, they really don't have the pieces in place for Daniel Jones to succeed early. They're probably still going to rely on Eli Manning. I don't know why. they really should have moved on from Eli like a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But hey, they got their they won those Super Bowls with Eli. It's kind of hard to move on
against
from a guy
Patriots of all teams.
That's kind of hard to move on from a guy that won 2 Super Bowls for you. Jonah Williams was the first significant offensive lineman taken in the draft. At 11th overall, he was being mocked to go later in that round. Kind of interesting, though, that the first significant offensive lineman goes at 11. We're used to seeing good tackles go much earlier in the first round. So the Bengals, I think, got good value here, getting one of the best offensive linemen in the draft to protect Andy Dalton. Washington had an absolute home run. You mentioned Dwayne Haskins. Yeah. That was the guy that Washington wanted, and they ended up getting him without having to trade up to get him, because so many analysts were thinking that Dwayne Haskins was going to go 6th to the Giants, and the Giants make their pick, and then Washington just pretty much counts the picks until they are able to draft a possible quarterback of the future, given that Case Keenum's on that roster. Alex Smith's probably not going to play, and I think Colt McCoy is still on that roster as well for Washington. No real long-term quarterback future there. Good pick, I think, by Washington, but it'll be interesting to see what they do with him in his first couple years. Don't look now. I think the Green Bay Packers might be starting to develop a pretty good defense. They're kind of running out of excuses now for Aaron Rodgers. They drafted a couple defensive players in the first round, Rashawn Gary and Darnell Savage, a couple Big Ten guys on that roster. Green Bay now, they're getting looks at, possibly being the best team in the NFC North again, as maybe we wouldn't like to see that, as our inner Vikings fans are, possibly creeping out in this. But, I wouldn't be so shocked if Green Bay was back in contention again in the NFC this year, given that they've spent a lot of high draft picks on defensive players to help out Aaron Rodgers, because the old excuse for the Packers was, well, Rodgers has to bail out that defense every time. He doesn't have any help defensively. Well, he's been getting help now, so now it's really time for Aaron Rodgers to get over that injury and start actually winning games for Green Bay again. Minnesota made the right pick, I thought, at their spot at 18th overall, getting Garrett Bradbury, one of the top centers in the NCAA last year. He won the Remington Award. Garrett Bradbury is going to be, I think, a very viable asset for the Vikings. Protecting Kirk Cousins last year was largely a failure because of the offensive line play of Minnesota. That's going to be important for them moving forward. Philadelphia, later on in that first round, they also got one of the best tackles in the draft, Dillard, out of Washington State. Carson Wentz now gets more protection possibly this year, but also could be the heir apparent to their current left tackle, Jason Peters. This was a pretty largely starless first round, I'd say, but I think this is a good I think this is you got a lot of good value, I think, in this draft. Not a lot of flashy players in at least the first round, and really just in this draft in general.
Yeah. Overall, which teams do you think had a good draft, and which teams do you think had a not so good draft?
I think, well, obviously, we still have to wait and see for these players to actually get out on the field. Yeah. I did like a lot what the Minnesota Vikings did, all bias hopefully aside, addressing a potential need for the future tight end in the second round, Irv Smith Jr. out of Alabama, and getting other quality players later in that draft. They had a lot of late round picks, so the Vikings are hoping that some of those pan out in the future. Green Bay, I just mentioned, getting a couple defensive players could help them out. Really, and we just have to wait and see. Atlanta got a couple offensive linemen in the first round, which I thought was interesting. I didn't really see the need for them, considering their downfall last year was lack of depth on defense. A lot of their star players went down on defense, and that just derailed their season. Maybe the New England Patriots could be considered one of the winners of the draft as well. They got a guy at the end of the first round that could be a big physical player for them in their passing game now that Rob Gronkowski's gone. We still have to obviously wait and see, but I think the New York Giants probably got to be one of the biggest losers of the draft, of the first round of the draft at least. Getting Daniel Jones, big head scratcher. Their second first-round pick was a guy that they probably could have gotten in the second round. Dexter Lawrence, I think it was, out of Clemson. And they had another pick. They spent it on the first cornerback. It was kind of a weird pick. And the Giants had three first-round picks, and they were all kind of head-scratchers in their own way. The Oakland Raiders, some head-scratchers for their 3 first-round picks, but, with Mike Mayock, they're a very well-respected analyst making the transition to general manager. Be interesting to see how the Oakland Raiders and the New York Giants how they recover from kind of a bit of a PR hit
Yeah.
on draft night in the first round at least. We'll see how this all pans out.
Yeah, and going back to your point quick on the Packers, I think them getting good young defensive players is going to be good for their future, but it's also going to be good for them now because this could be these last few years with Aaron Rodgers, this could be their last shot at a Super Bowl with Rodgers.
Oh, yeah.
Once Rodgers retires, regardless of how good their defense is, if they don't have a good quarterback leading that offense, they've had 20-plus years of high quality, of just Hall of Fame quarterback play.
Now, I wish I knew if Green Bay took a quarterback in their draft this year. I think it would have been smart for them to do so, considering New England got a guy, Jarrett Stidham, in the 4th round that a lot of NFL draft analysts were really high on last year, but Stidham didn't go to the draft. So it'll be interesting to see if Stidham develops as the heir apparent to Tom Brady whenever he actually decides to hang up his cleats.
Yeah. So going to go ahead and move on to some NDSU players who were picked up by teams. Easton Stick in particular was drafted in the 5th round by the Los Angeles Chargers.
Big time.
Were you happy where Easton got drafted and the team that drafted him?
I would say I'm very happy, actually. I believe it or not, when I was watching Stick play last year, obviously he's playing really well, but I just didn't really see him, maybe getting the looks, obviously, that Carson Wentz did. That was a given, but I don't know if I almost kind of thought that he might not have been drafted at all, but I'm really happy that, the LA Chargers are giving him a chance to at least compete and learn behind Phillip Rivers in the future, because Phillip Rivers is a Hall of Fame quarterback.
Yes.
And Easton Stick is already, he's already demonstrated throughout his career here at NDSU that he has a very high football IQ. He's willing to learn. He sat behind Carson Wentz during his freshman year for a little bit.
Definitely knows how to win.
Oh yeah, and that was one of the main reasons why the Chargers drafted him. If you really want, a heartwarming reaction, watch the moment that the Chargers drafted Easton Stick. That got me in the feels a little bit.
Yeah,
just
it was
seeing
great.
Easton play for the last few years here, and then just seeing all that hard work realized with one phone call. And he also got picked one pick ahead of the Eagles, which I thought was interesting because the Eagles, they were in the market for a backup quarterback as well. They end up not getting a chance to select Stick, and that would have been an interesting opportunity for Wentz and Stick to be in the same quarterback room. Yeah. But the Eagles had to settle for Clayton Thorson.
So real quick, before we go to break, talk to me about some of the NDSU players who weren't drafted but were either taken as undrafted free agents or were invited to certain mini camps.
I think there are 6 other players that are listed, and I'll be talking about them in tomorrow's Bison Information Network News Sports. You can find me talk more about where they all go if I don't touch on them. But, I'm really excited, I think, for guys like Tanner Volson, an offensive lineman. You can never have too many offensive linemen. He's going to be in Los Angeles in minicamps with Easton Stick, his former teammate, and I'm also kind of excited for Bruce Anderson. He kind of had a little bit of an up and down career here at NDSU, but he got signed as an undrafted free agent by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that's where he's from. He's from Ruskin, Florida, so it'll be interesting to see if he can make a spot in the roster. Robbie Grimsley got invited to a minicamp for the New Orleans Saints. And Darius Shepard got an invite from the Green Bay Packers, I believe. Those guys, I think they can play. I think with NDSU in general, you're not going to get, more often than not, a lot of combine warriors, the underwear Olympics guys. But I think if you put them on a football field, they'll produce well. I think more often than not, they tend to have high IQs. I have high hopes for a lot of these guys. It'll just be interesting to see how they pan out.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. But we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to discuss our continuing coverage of the NHL and NBA playoffs.
The NDSU Bookstore, where every true fan and alum goes to get their pride on. Gear up with a variety of high-quality t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, and more. Made by top-of-the-line brands like Under Armour, Nike, and CI Sport to help you show off your Bison pride. The NDSU Bookstore has everything you need in your two favorite colors, green and gold.
I remember the moment
I'll never forget that moment.
that changed my life.
At that moment, it hit me. This is why I joined the Guard. We're soldiers, always ready to protect our country. But we've also got communities. Family, friends, neighbors who count on us. I couldn't believe it. I just saved a life. Somebody from my hometown.
See what it means to be a citizen soldier at NationalGuard.com.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the final episode of X's Nose. We're now going to start with our continuing coverage of the NHL playoffs. Isaac, so far we're now in round 2. Round 1 has all been concluded. But of the few games that have been played so far in the NHL second round, what series has surprised you the most in the second round?
Carolina, New York Islanders.
Yeah?
Carolina won 2 games on the road. Now, obviously, it wasn't the most ideal situation for the Islanders. They just swept the Penguins in the first round, and you'd think after all that time off, after all the other series in the NHL lasted longer than 4 games than their series against Pittsburgh did, you'd think they'd be much more well-rested. But you also got to consider that the Islanders won their 2 games at home at Nassau Coliseum. They didn't play their first 2 games in this series in that building. They played them at the Barclays Center, where they spent most of this season, and it's just not a hockey event.
No.
It's just not a hockey venue.
It's really not. I would argue that it honestly, they swept the Penguins. As you said, Penguins are one of the most formidable opponents in the playoffs. And then you go put them in Barclays Center, and I think it just killed their momentum.
I mean, when it gets going, as we saw in that first round, Nassau is one of the most electric hockey venues as you can get. And
Nobody cares about the Islanders in Brooklyn.
And just the layout of the arena is just not a hockey arena. It's a basketball arena with a hockey a sheet of ice just kind of put in there.
Yeah, it didn't work when they moved there originally after leaving Nassau for a couple seasons. And now they go back to Nassau Coliseum. They're getting a new an actual arena to officially replace Nassau Coliseum.
About time.
But it's Islanders at Nassau.
They only scored
here. Islanders at Barclays Center down here. But it's killed their momentum. But do you think they can get it back and hopefully take at least 1 game in Raleigh?
They only scored 1 goal at home, and that's just where if you're an Islanders fan, the optimism's getting a little low. You lost both games at home, and now you're going back to Raleigh, North Carolina, where they love the Hurricanes down there now.
Yeah,
I mean, they have every reason to be incredibly excited now. They're only 2 games from the Eastern Conference Finals. And so, I mean, Game 3 is tonight. That'll be happening as we're recording this, I think, in about an hour.
Yeah.
But, it'll be really interesting to see what Carolina can do at home, as, they have every reason to be, I think the favorites in this series. Now, with the rest of the playoffs, maybe not, but hey, they've made it this far, and who knows with the other Eastern Conference playoff series, they could end up making some noise. Who knows what ends up happening?
Speaking of other series, I want to talk a little bit about
I want to let you lead into this first.
Columbus Blue Jackets versus the Boston Bruins. We spoke in our last show how I said Blue Jackets will win maybe 1 or 2 games, but ultimately lose in 6. So far, that seems to be the opposite. Boston, I believe, took game 1, and then Columbus won back-to-back games to take the series lead 2-1, going back in Columbus for game 4. So, can the Blue Jackets keep this momentum going into Game 4?
By the way, unfortunately, we're not doing another edition of What Did We Say this week, but I think
it's not totally out of the question.
It's not out of the question for the future. However, it's just, an unfortunate, that we didn't. But anyway, that would have been a good thing to bring up, because now Boston would have to win every game for your prediction to be right. So that could have been an interesting thing to talk about. But man, Columbus, How about the spunk that they have? They won. They sent both games in Boston to overtime.
Yep.
Obviously, won and lost one. The second game was in double overtime, and then they come back to Nationwide Arena. They win another 1-goal game. Sergei Bobrovsky, 34, 29, and 32 saves so far in 3 games. That is the difference so far in this series for Columbus. Big game 4 coming up for them later on in this week. But man, Columbus, just who would have thunk? I mean, we even acknowledged ourselves that, the Tampa Bay Lightning, they were, Columbus's first-round opponent. Columbus, we thought, had no business being in the series against Tampa. And now look where they are. They're halfway to the Eastern Conference Finals. Boston, this was supposed to be their year after the other teams in the East kind of, bowed out. They beat Toronto, who's considered a threat. Washington, the defending champions, they lose. And it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh loses and Tampa loses. Boston, this is supposed to be the year. They need to win Game 4 to have a legitimate chance in this series, I think.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think the Blue Jackets they've been surprising us all playoffs, sweeping the President's Trophy winner and the Norris Trophy winner Lightning, and then taking it to the Boston Bruins pretty much. They've kept pace with them. I thought they were gonna do what the Islanders are doing right now, just completely folding under the pressure after sweeping a high quality opponent.
Hockey's like the most unpredictable sport of the major pro sports.
NHL playoffs are the best playoffs that no one's heard about in the United States. Not a lot of people care about the NHL, but if people started watching the playoffs more, they would all fall in love with it.
I just wonder if this kind of stuff, if these kind of antics continues, what's the viewership going to be like for the Stanley Cup Finals? Are we really about to have a Carolina versus St. Louis Finals or something? Or?
I would watch the heck out of that.
Well, all right. You can obviously make compelling arguments for
I'm an underdog
anybody.
guy. I like the underdogs. So seeing an underdog Stanley Cup Final, I think, would be pretty entertaining. But going ahead to the Western Conference side of the NHL playoffs, you got the San Jose Sharks versus the Colorado Avalanche. San Jose has also have a 2-1 lead over the Avalanche at this point. Game 4 is also tonight.
Yep.
Taking a look at the Sharks, they've been talented ever since they became a franchise. Pretty much they've had loads upon loads of talent. But when you look at this core, their big stars, they're getting up there. Joe Thornton's 39, Brent Bird's 33, Joe Pavelski's 34, and a lot of their other talent is in their late 30s. Do you think if the Sharks win this series against the Avalanche, is this their last shot at a Stanley Cup with this core?
Maybe not their last, but the urgency is there. The urgency is 100% there. They have as good of an opportunity as they've ever had to win the Cup this year, and they need to do it. Considering all the division winners, every division winner in the NHL in the first round lost.
Yeah.
San Jose also shouldn't be here because they, were down 3-1 to Vegas, and, we even pointed out in dramatic fashion our predictions on Vegas were just completely and utterly wrong. So please, San Jose, continue to prove us wrong.
Yeah.
Do something for your fans. Finally get that cup that you and your fans have been looking for so long. This is as good of an opportunity as you're going to have with the rest of the teams in the Western Conference and in the Eastern Conference for that matter. Do something, San Jose. Win it all. Prove us wrong. Keep proving us wrong, please.
Yeah. And then I personally, I would love to see them in the Stanley Cup Finals again. I think they had a good shot. They went 6 with the Penguins in 2016. I think this team, they added Evander Kane.
This is a different team.
As big of a head case as Evander Kane is, he's still extremely talented. They wouldn't have signed him to a 7-year deal if they didn't want to keep him around as a valuable asset. But going into the last playoff bracket, part of the bracket, is the Dallas Stars versus the St. Louis Blues. Blues up in that series. The Blues, another team that was part of was one of the first expansion teams added since the original 6, and they have not made the Stanley Cup Finals since their 3rd year of existence when they got swept in their 3rd straight Stanley Cup Finals. What do you think it takes for the Blues to go up and beat the Stars and have a chance to compete with a team, either the Sharks or the Avalanche?
Well, they're up 2-1 now. I think they should ideally beat Dallas. And I think, with evaluating the Blues, it just seems like it's going to be every other year because that's really all we know. St. Louis, more often than not, when they get to the playoffs, they fold. Whenever the pressure gets to them, they just kind of fold. And, if they do beat Dallas, they're likely going to go up against San Jose. I would probably put St. Louis favorite over Colorado, but not against the talent that San Jose has. But, man, St. Louis, if they're in that position, I just don't see them making it to the Stanley Cup Finals, let alone winning it. It's going to be, I think it might be another disappointment for the Blues. But give a ton of credit, though, to that coaching staff dealing with the firing of Mike Yeo mid-season. One of the worst teams in the Western Conference in January, so like 99 points, 98 points, and a playoff team at the end of the season. Yeah. Give a lot of credit to the Blues, but unfortunately, I just don't see anything that we haven't seen in the past happening for St. Louis this year.
We'll have to see how it all unfolds within the next few days, but we're going to go ahead and move ahead to the NBA playoffs. I think, looking at it right now, the two top seeds going at each other happen to be in the same conference, and that's Boston versus Milwaukee and Toronto and Philadelphia. Who do you think comes out on top between those four teams?
Man, I really like Boston's roster, and I want them to succeed, but, man, Giannis, after, Game 2, Milwaukee looked shell-shocked on their home floor against Boston, but the third quarter of Game 2 happened. They outscored them 39-18.
Yikes.
Watch out for the rest of the series. Who cares if Boston's got home court now the rest of the way? Mm-hmm. Milwaukee's, I think, the better, more cohesive team. Boston, they showed a lot of fight in that Game 1. Al Horford played tremendously against Giannis Antetokounmpo, but, Milwaukee, it's kind of been the team of destiny, I thought, in the Eastern Conference this year, given all that. It was supposed to be Boston, but Boston's had all their internal issues. Boston's as talented as any team in the NBA, and they'd give the Warriors, I think, a good run for their money, but I think Milwaukee might just end up outlasting them in this series. It might go the distance. Toronto, Philadelphia, Toronto really didn't help themselves out by only having three guys that really did anything in Game 2 against Philadelphia. It was really just Leonard, Lowry, and Siakam that led them, but I still like Toronto's roster quite a bit. I still have them going to the NBA Finals over Milwaukee at this point in the playoffs. But both the Eastern Conference series should be really, really competitive, and they are probably must-watch. Definitely, I think, actually must-watch TV.
Yeah, and going to the next series, the series in the Western Conference, the Trailblazers versus the Nuggets. Obviously, the Trailblazers come off that huge game 5 buzzer beater.
This many.
Game 5 buzzer beater over the Thunder, knocked them off, but then going to Game 1 against the Nuggets after Nuggets win a hard-fought 7-game series against the Spurs, and the Nuggets ended up winning Game 1. You think the Trailblazers bounce back and take Game 2 here?
A lot of people throughout the season have been comparing the Denver Nuggets to the 2015 Atlanta Hawks. Just, a really good team, for the regular season, but not really one guy that you can give the ball to in the playoffs and say, hey, get me a basket. Well, Nikola Jokic proved that wrong in Game 1 against Portland. 37 points, look really good. I just don't see how Portland, even though they do have Damian Lillard that probably can match Jokic's, production, Denver's a really well-oiled machine. I'd like Denver to move on to the Western Conference Finals. And right now as well, with Golden State versus Houston, I think we were about to get into that. It's an interesting first couple games in Oakland. Golden State, they probably feel like they got away with Game 1 a little bit. James Harden, there's all that controversy in Game 1, whether he was getting fouled on three-pointers or not, whether they were properly giving Harden space to land, and that's kind of true, but at the same time, Harden was kind of jumping forward on his threes. He was initiating contact.
Very pointed out, if you watch SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt, he pointed that out in a segment. He said when James Harden's wide open, he doesn't jump forward like he does when he takes contested threes. So he got more fouls called for him.
Oh yeah,
beyond the 3-point line than any other player.
I don't think it was even close either.
No. The other he had 95. The two people who were tied for second had 34.
So that's not even close.
Yeah, he had
that's
more,
not close.
He converted more 4-point plays than any other team. So he's used to getting those calls, but you're not going to get those calls against the Golden State Warriors.
Especially in the playoffs. When the officials are more instructed to swallow their whistles on close plays like that. But, Houston, they're going back home. Who knows if this series can get interesting again. But, man, Golden State, It hurts Houston quite a bit.
Yeah.
I really wanted them. I think a lot of NBA fans would have loved to see the Warriors go down at the hands of the Rockets. But, man, it's really difficult now with Golden State taking the first two at home and Golden State being a very formidable opponent in any building in America. So, and I guess in Canada, too, at that point, if we're talking about the NBA. Yeah.
I think there's no other way to say it. Warriors have the Rockets' number. Every year since the Warriors started this dynasty, they've had to go through the Rockets.
Varying levels of good teams, at least in that era for Houston,
but still, nonetheless, keep losing to the Warriors in the playoffs. Well, that is going to do it for the final episode of X's
It's a
and O's.
shame that we have to stop doing shows as well, I guess, for this semester. But hopefully we'll be back next semester, right, Joe? Well, cool.
All
right.
I don't know why we wouldn't, but thank you guys so much for watching us this semester.
Absolutely.
Us taking over from the previous host. I hope we did a good enough job so you guys can keep watching into next semester. For Bison Information Network, I'm Joe Thompson.
And I'm Isaac Dienison.
We'll see you next year.